Nerd Street!
Nerd Street! Hey, welcome back to Nerd Street. We're so excited. We have our first episode with a special guest. You already know Nick Nintendo. I'm Brent, and this is also Brent. There's two of us.
They're clones.
He has more hair, though.
A little bit.
Now, Brent, I've met through gaming and things like that as a job. He's a mathematician, so he's got like a brain that could fill this whole room.
He knows his shit.
It's actually what the hair's made of.
Right, it's just fibers of neural fibers and stuff like that.
Neural fibers.
So today we've got a very interesting topic, and the topic is debating Star Wars versus Star Trek.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we could say the debate is which one is better, but in truth it's an opinion, so there's
Yes.
really no better or not, but pros and cons of each, why people might like Star Wars versus Star Trek, vice versa. I've got two people that are knowledgeable in their perspective topics, and I'm just going to kind of referee it, make sure they don't end up at each other's throats and stuff. So
no one gets cut with a lightsaber or tased.
right. So Nick, you start us off with your.
All right, so I've never actually done this. I've never talked to a Star Trek fan in depth. Never got to really pick their brains or know what makes them tick when it comes to that series, if you will. I know that when I was growing up, the first sci-fi that was put in front of me was, in fact, Star Trek, and I liked it. There was something missing, though, as far as something bigger, maybe phantasmical, maybe spiritual, religious. There was something missing besides just looking at cool tech and traveling from planet to planet and finding a different color alien. It's kind of how I saw it when I was a kid. Not talking crap, but once Star Wars was put in front of me, when they brought in the aspect of the Force, I realized there was no limit. There was no ceiling on this series. You can get into, the Force can change characters, can add layers, add depth, take it away, can make them stronger, make them weaker, make them kind of into different types of men or women based on who they are inside when they're born. If you're a good or bad person and the Force is in you or you're Force sensitive, it could really pave the way for your life on how you take it. It's your decision and your choice. And the layers that come with that can always expand to lots of different stories and lots of unique stories. Now, to me, in Star Trek, it's just another episode. What planet are we going to? Are they going to use the taser today? And I don't mean to cheapen it, but that's my vision. So I would love to hear more.
Well, in that respect, it's really a comparison at that point of
Okay.
movie versus TV show. A movie, you have all this extra time to dedicate to one story, fleshing out all the characters for one specific event. You know, all told, Star Wars is being told, let's even just single it down to the original trilogy at this point.
Yeah, that's probably the smartest thing to do.
Right, we're talking about, 5 hours, 6 hours of
Total in the
story.
trilogy.
Yeah, that's about that. That'd be a season for any real TV show.
That's true. That's true. With much more content and layers to flesh out characters, like you're saying, you get more time.
And so, I think a lot of your complaints boil down to really that major difference between the two series.
Okay. Squeezing so much info into the small time you have, as opposed to letting things spread out before you understand so much.
And more than that, there's also the need to spread it out because you don't want to focus everything into one story. And then
Blowing your load that fast, if you will,
Right,
with all
right.
your content. Very true. Okay. With that being said, now, as far as giving the time to spread out to get involved, as we stick with series over years, Star Trek is a long-running thing. After all the layers come out and come into fruition over time, and they spend the time expanding and building on the story, there's much more to it than I'm labeling it, isn't there? It goes much beyond tech and 70s retro outfits.
It does have a very different philosophy between the two shows.
Okay.
If I may describe them both this way, Star Trek is really the sci-fi show.
Okay.
Star Wars, at least as far as the original trilogy is concerned, was always heralded as a cowboy western set in space.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, from so many inspirations George pulled from was a lot of westerns, and the only sci-fi I really know that he pulled from was, I think, like Flash Gordon and stuff like that. A lot of stuff from the Odyssey, but it was a lot of western cowboy stuff. You're right, and you could feel it and see it in the films. I do think though that, and Brent and I were talking earlier, and he brought up something that was a whole new layer of the conversation that I could talk for hours. This is what gets me going. He called Star Trek the atheist sci-fi series.
It's interesting you mentioned that because
It is.
in the show they really don't bring up faiths a lot in the show, except when that is the focal point of each individual episode.
Aha. Like, oh, okay. But it's never a big picture cloud that ever floats across the
There's
series.
never
It's not attacked
any.
like that.
If there is, it's seldom. But
Gotcha. Okay. Now they do that on.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
as far as there isn't like a unifying single faith system in Star Trek that would unify, say, the Star Wars universe. There's no
You're right.
one thing that everyone can agree on, and there's just like these weird anomalies that people attribute to this or to that, and at times the point of the episode is to point out that not everything can be explained from a scientific standpoint.
And that's absolutely true. In real life, it mirrors the same thing as real life, which is really exciting.
You know, one of the things that you and I had talked about as well, and based on what Brent was talking about, comparing the need to spread things out and whatever. If you compare the original Star Wars trilogy to, say, the original season of Star Trek, because if I remember correctly, the original Star Trek only ran one season, is that correct?
Maybe.
Okay.
We'll look into that.
We
We'll throw that in there.
can
We'll
look
find
that
that out. We'll find that out.
So figure those are kind of, equal in, say, 6 hours of content.
Absolutely.
Now, Star Trek has had novels and things extra.
Just like-
Star Wars has had novels and things extra. Now, if you look at, say, the new trilogy, which so far we've only had 2 movies of in Star Wars, you've got Star Trek The Next Generation, which ran like 9 seasons or
yeah.
something like that. So that would be comparable to the new trilogy or the new movies having 8 movies. And
Absolutely.
imagine
I
the
agree.
amount of depth and story progression they could
That
have.
could be inserted. You
Right.
know, absolutely. Okay.
So there's definitely far more canon
Yeah.
with Star Trek than there is Star Wars.
That I agree on because of how many years it's been around. Now I want to go back to when we're talking about it being the atheist series, I guess. I totally agree and made a connection to what you said about there's no one force connecting everyone, like they can agree on that in Star Trek. And I kind of think, well, that does make sense because there's so many planets and so many different species, and if they don't have one unified thing like the Force, you can't pinpoint God or spirituality because all of these different planets and species, you don't know what their religion is, if they have one or not, or what they believe in. It's so big and there's so many different species that it's kind of fun to know that there's not one unifying, religion, if you will. That's super interesting that you say that. And
Although-
that makes me want to watch Star Trek a little bit.
Now,
sorry.
conversing that in Star Wars, not
Uh-huh.
even the Force is one unifying religion, so to say. In the original trilogy, it's treated as this kind of, it's treated with mockery. Remember when,
Yeah.
what was that character's name? The
even
Grand
Han
Moff
Solo
Tarkin.
Grand
Yeah.
Moff Tarkin was like, you and your religion have gotten us no closer to these rebels or something like
Yeah,
that.
that's a good point to bring
So
up. Even
it's-
Moff Tarkin, he was all business and knew that was hokey pokey to him.
Right.
You know?
It might be because it is a dead religion, but
Uh-huh.
despite the fact they can actually manifest these powers,
Uh-huh.
it's treated with just
Respect.
mockery. Well,
Well, I mean, from the people using it, but the outsiders.
Well, even
Mockery,
Luke was
yeah.
treating it. Luke and Han, the first
Yeah.
time they
Oh,
experienced
Han,
it
yeah.
on the Falcon, they were like, "Well, what is this? You can't even really do this. This is made up. You're
Yeah.
making
Give
full
me
of
a
my life."
blaster.
Yeah,
and-
nothing's better than a blaster at your side. No, not tricks and magic, basically. And then that's when Obi-Wan was like, "You don't believe in it, do you?"
Right.
And he's
and
like, "There's
we-
not one
even though Luke is-
all-powerful force."
Yeah, Luke is blocking these lasers in front of Han. It's
Yeah.
like, it's baloney.
You're absolutely right. Now, in today's society, I know a lot of people that if you take them to church, they come back home and say the same thing.
Mm.
So it's kind of relatable in real life, but you're absolutely right. It's treated with mockery and just respect by those who can probably manipulate it themselves.
Now, the interesting thing is, talking about Star Trek and not a unifying belief system or whatever, but one of the Star Trek movies was that Undiscovered Country or whatever. It ended up being, the nickname was The Search for God, because they go and it was like Star Trek 9 or something like that, and it was one of these, and they go and find this mystical being or something like that. It was one of the later ones that is believed to be one of the awful ones.
Oh, okay.
I will mention though they do meet quote unquote gods in
Really?
Star Trek. There's one episode in the original series where they literally meet. I think it was Apollo.
Really?
Yeah, they meet some of
Holy
the Greek
shit,
gods.
That's cool, man.
Yeah, I
And
didn't
they
know
don't
that.
really address it in any meaningful way other than that
Without.
Apollo is just a source of conflict.
Ah, okay.
It's like everyone walking around in the Marvel universe. Oh, here's Thor, the Norse god, but you know.
Exactly like that. It's a comment to them. It's like, hey, it's just a god of thunder. Is all him and what's going on. You know, I get it. Excellent, good stuff. So,
Well, Nick, hold on. I'm gonna give the ball to Brent for a second.
absolutely.
Now, Brent, so far you've been addressing a lot of the things he's saying. What is your opinion of Star Trek versus Star Wars? Which one do you like better or think is better, and why?
Well, for each one, it's really more of like a feeling of what I like. I do like both of them.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, one of them is a spaghetti western in space. The other
Like you
one
said.
is it's closer to being a true science fiction, well, if not a true science fiction.
Absolutely.
So one is more Star Trek, for example, is more about the problem solving and explanation for all these things going on. It's finding the answers.
Absolutely. You're
Star
right.
Wars is, hey, here's a conflict, let's shoot it out.
Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes, I just want to turn off my brain and pew pew lasers and lightsabers.
Now, okay, and you're right. I'll use a Star Trek line from a certain point of view. I
That's
think
Star Wars line, not
Star
Trek.
Wars. Oh gosh, shoot me. Well, maybe
No,
that
let's
means
make it
life.
like
Now, where I was going, where the hell were we?
he was talking about shoot 'em up versus.
Oh yeah, okay. So it could be seen from a point of view as certain point of view as shoot 'em ups and things like that. But with me, it infected my life so much is how much more I took from just pew 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 swords and conflict. I was thinking about how deep the force runs. What does it feel like inside? Does it change your life? Where if I saw a ghost or saw an angel in real life, how it would change me? I would stop everything I was doing that I thought was negative and probably go become a priest. I think that depth with Star Wars. I'm thinking, so Luke has a power inside him, like Rey and like everyone else that has the Force, and they're just not saying, cool, I can go crush a building or lift a rock. They're like, how do I use this to make everything better? The world a better place, the galaxy a better place. How can I join resistance or rebels to overthrow negative, the negative villains in the world, if you will. And for me, I think about how, like the dark side, like the Sith, you can't think it's simple, can you? I mean, that's like the
Unfortunately, I can't.
okay, now how? That's
Now-
like the dark side of a man. I don't think it's technical to have the dark side of yourself. And in real life, there's a lot of layers to why someone would be negative, dark, or take a wrong
Well,
path.
right. In that
Yeah.
respect, there is a lot of layers to it, the inner conflict that every person faces. But
Okay.
as far as Star Wars goes, there are the light side and the dark side.
Yeah.
As far as, Grey Jedi or whatever, that's
Yeah.
all
I'm
extended
not into
universe.
that. That's
We're
what I
not
tell
gonna
him.
talk about
When he
that
talks
right
about
now.
Grey Jedi, I always tell him.
That's a story for another time.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
But the morality in the Star Wars movies is very literally black and white, the light and the dark.
He's right.
You have your good guys, they are objectively good in just about every way. Sometimes they make a questionable decision here and there, but
For the most part, you're right.
Right.
They're light.
and then you have your dark side. They are bad. They abuse their own workers, they kill them. They
Which is cliche. I see where you're going.
Right.
It's very cliche.
it is just cut and dry. There is no distinction between who's good and who's bad. Now, with the exception of the new movies, which I kind of like that they
Kylo Ren.
put a spin on that, Kylo Ren.
Kylo Ren. They did. I was gonna bring that up next. I'm glad you touched on it.
And then, whereas in Star Trek, the whole point is exploring the morality of individual cases. You might they might come across a planet that's in some kind of civil turmoil.
It has
And-
nothing to do with that.
Right,
But
and
they're
then
there. Yeah.
this side says one thing, this side says the other thing, and to us, it seems like a really menial, just pointless argument. Like, why would anyone argue about this? But at the same point, this is important to them, and this is important to them, and they cannot handle it. So what is right at that point?
You're right, and they kind of they got to come in and just kind of feather that or try to figure it out for them because, I mean, they don't know what's right themselves. Like I'm sure the Enterprise and the people on it, when they run into these conflicts, it's not like they're a master of their politics on this planet. They got to
Right.
figure this out too.
And that you bring up an excellent point, the black and white good and evil of Star Wars, whereas Star Trek is different cultures. And who is to say who is right and wrong? It's just a different paradigm, a different point of view. I mean, the Klingons and Worf, they're a warlike culture. And we as Americans, we would look at that and be like, that's awful.
Mhm.
All they want to do is slay their enemies and stuff like that, but that's their paradigm. But they're not doing it because haha, evil is awesome. It's
Yeah.
that's just how they are.
That's
I think I'm gonna not what's the word I'm looking for? Not correct, but slightly alter one thing you said earlier. Whereas Star Trek is true sci-fi, I don't think Star Wars is spaghetti western. I think Firefly was spaghetti western in space. Star Wars is high fantasy
Like,
in space
close to
with
the
good
Odyssey
and
kind.
evil. And I mean, when you think about it, Star Wars at its core is the story of King Arthur and Merlin.
Yeah, I can see that.
I can see that.
Mhm.
I was just kind of chalked up to spaghetti western because I know that's where Lucas drew a lot of his inspiration
And
from.
you're right.
You're gonna see some of the same stances like Han coming up.
Oh, you're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
And
That's
then-
100% true, and I'm with you on that. On putting that label on it, I am. But as a fan, there's just so much more I see that I know a lot of people don't because it was kind of my alley. So you have passions that you create as a kid based on things you like. You read certain comic books, you see certain cartoons. It kind of forms the kind of stuff you like. Like I grew up watching kind of darker cartoons, so I love Empire Strikes Back. I like dark movies, and I love serious tones because everything I was exposed to as a kid was kind of that way. So, with that being said, I must have not seen the correct episodes or films of Star Trek, but do they go to that dark area? Say maybe as far as a Sith, or maybe as far as a conflict that's just really dark or serious.
The Star Trek universe isn't really big on
Okay.
absolute, like just objective.
Absolutes.
Yeah, well, yeah, they don't deal in absolutes.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, okay.
I suppose in that respect they're all Jedi.
Yeah.
They do deal in the extremes of a specific, what's the word I want to use here? A specific attribute of a personality. Like, say, the Klingons
Which I
are
like.
an absolution of aggression,
Barbaric.
barbarianism, but tied in with honor. It's like a spacefaring race of the how we would picture the old primitive ancient races.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're
okay.
big on honor, respect, fighting.
And brute force is what solves things, through that honor. Kind of, yeah.
Might makes right.
There you go. Okay.
The Vulcans are the purity of logic. Everything they do is meant to have just this, to be perfectly thought out.
In your respects, the mathematicians of the Star Trek universe.
In a way of
In a way,
speaking.
yeah. Well, that's how I've seen it with, which I want to bring this up soon. The way J.J. Abrams redid Star Trek,
Mhm.
I see on the internet that a lot of people hated it. I loved it so much, I was ready to get into Star Trek.
Star Trek.
Why is that?
J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. The reason I think a lot of people didn't like it was because
I loved it.
it took everything and exaggerated every attribute of everything in Star Trek. Everything went faster. Everything was louder. Every expression was cranked up to 11.
Right. And
I'm
it's
starting to
interesting you say
find
that.
out about myself here. That's what made me like it, though. And that's kind of, maybe that's the glitz and glamour of Hollywood that I'm realizing I do fall for. You know what
Well-
I mean? The gloss, the
Mhm.
plain cover,
And lens flare.
and the lens flares, right. I like this guy. Hey,
I
guys.
liked the original. Well, I liked J.J. Abrams' first Star Trek. Then I really liked Into Darkness.
That was one of my
and
favorite
with
sci-fi
Khan.
movies.
Well, first of all, we're both big Cumberbatch
Big,
fans.
huge Benedict Cumberbatch. The
But
guy that played Khan. was
Khan-
incredible.
Right.
Khan wasn't evil, although they made him out to be a total badass. He was out to save his people.
But he was thinking
had
close-mindedly.
motivation. Well, it was his mind frame.
He's talking about saving 12 people.
Well,
He's doing
still.
all this for 12 people stuck in a missile.
Well, if for your family,
At this point, if you had to give up, a whole planet full of people for 12 people you knew and loved and spent your life
The
with,
only ones. Yeah.
right? The only ones.
I guess.
That's-
Absolutely.
Who,
That's all
how
I would
many
be alive
people?
for.
How many people on this planet do you think would do that?
That's a shitty place, so
It's a place nobody wants to think about.
and now
You're right,
Star
it
Trek
is.
Beyond.
But, okay.
Okay, in my opinion, Star Trek Beyond, I liked it, but in my opinion, it wasn't Star Trek. It was Fast and the Furious in outer space.
I can see that.
What's that? Into Darkness?
No, Star Trek Beyond,
Oh,
the
okay.
third movie.
Now, yeah, that one.
With the
I,
motorcycles in outer
I
space.
actually, not to talk too negatively about that production. I know it wasn't done by J.J. Abrams, and I felt it because after 45 minutes I shut it off, so I don't even know how it ended.
Okay.
Something felt different than the first two installments of the new Star Trek films. Definitely felt very different, than the ones J.J. did to me. And I know Beyond had to be done without him because he jumped into Star Wars
Yeah.
during that time. Yeah.
Now, Brent, let me, if I'm understanding you correctly, just to kind of summarize, it sounds like you've really laid out well what kind of the fundamental differences between
Absolutely.
Star Wars and Star Trek is. You tend to prefer Star Trek because you prefer the more pure science fiction experience. Is that what I'm hearing?
Actually,
you say?
I just prefer it because there's more to watch, so I can put it on the TV and binge it.
Okay.
The more pure content.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
And then it's a 40-minute installment at a time. I don't have,
Yeah.
like I'm not.
No, you're
sit
committed
there-
for 3 hours
Right.
sitting. Absolutely, and that's very true. But I like the reason, going back to what you asked about, being more real life today's sciences that are applied to what we kind of know already and established. That gets me excited. I gotta say that after talking to you, and this is no bullcrap, I'm actually gonna go watch Star Trek tonight. I'm gonna do some digging. I'm gonna go back and see because everything reasons you like it gets me going. That's the reasons I like things, but I can't find it in that pure form. And it sounds like Star Trek may have some of this in its purest form, so I'm gonna do some homework.
Now
That's for sure.
there are different series definitely feel differently as well.
Okay.
The original series it's very much meant to be pure science fiction.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of guys who got together and said, how could this actually happen? They try to really
In
rationalize
production,
everything.
yeah.
That's why they went with warp drive instead of just hyperdrive. Do you understand the difference between warp and
I
hyperdrive?
do not.
All right, so
I
for
just
those
know
of you-
hyperdrive.
the difference between warp and hyperdrive is the warp drive tries to remain within the constraints of the universe. Hyperdrive says we just go fast. We're at Luke hops into an X-wing, flies to Dagobah, and he's there at the next scene. That's
You just summed up Star Wars. Nice job.
the idea behind warp drive, though, is that you can't travel faster than the speed of light. It's an absolute limit. So they have multiple engines. They have their sublight drives, where they just go really fast. That's how they get between planets usually.
Okay. Okay.
Planets within a system. They, it takes them a few minutes at a time. Then they have their warp drive. Their warp drive, what that does
When
is
you gotta go
actually
further distances,
when you
right?
got to go further, faster. You're talking about traveling between stars
Okay.
and things like that. Normally, even at light speed, that would take hundreds, thousands, millions of
Yeah.
years at a time.
Okay.
So that's why light drive even would be pointless in the Star Trek universe. So you need warp drive. What warp drive does is it actually takes space and bends it so that way 2 points are actually closer together.
Yeah. It's like the theory of folding that piece of paper and
Right.
punching
Yeah.
a pencil through it.
And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
interesting that you bring up, speed of light and
Wow.
everything like that, because that's one issue I had with Star Wars Force Awakens, is everyone's watching the Star Killer base blow up these planets in real time, when in truth, that light would take years to get that.
That's
for them
true.
to see it.
But that's getting nitpicky to the point where we can't have sci-fi productions, because how do you watch an explosion in space without sound? Every time you go pay to the movies to go see that, Star Wars wouldn't even have
Well, right,
sound
and
in
that's
space.
why I'm not saying.
Firefly was big on that.
What were they? And they pulled it off?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I would like to see that.
Like
then.
there was a scene where
And maybe
Jane was on the
beautiful.
railgun and shooting that, and you just hear.
That's
don't even
actually
hear anything
pretty.
at all.
That actually may take a add to the scene.
And-
The chaos and going on in the bridge, and everyone's yelling, and you hear alerts going off, and then when it's time to fight, it's
Now you do still hear something, but
Yeah.
But it's trying to be as accurate as it can be.
it's trying to
but
represent
still
the
entertaining.
Keep in mind,
Absolutely.
I'm not saying Force Awakens sucked because of that little thing. I'm not
Yeah.
being that nitpicky.
But you're
I'm just
explaining
saying,
what Star Trek
that-
would address.
right.
I just want to end on one thought.
Absolutely.
Star Wars versus Star Trek in a fight. Let's talk about
In
that.
a straight fight,
Yeah,
try to
straight
make
fight.
it physical.
A
man.
full on
A Jedi versus a taser.
Enterprise versus the Star Destroyer.
How about the Enterprise? Is it dumb to say the Falcon versus the Enterprise? Maneuverability, the Millennium Falcon.
Oh, the Falcon.
The Star Destroyer is big
Let's do
and
it.
bulky. Let's do it.
Yeah.
All right. Can we make that another episode?
Sure.
we do it
Let's,
here.
we can. I mean, we've got it's.
Let's do it here. All right. So, I know there's so even though light speed is not what's in the Star Trek universe, is it still not the strongest, speediest way to travel in the grand scheme?
I don't know if it would matter quite
Okay.
yet. I mean, let's just say that they're going to fight,
Okay. All right.
and if one of them leaves, they're conceding the fight.
Okay. Let's do it. Okay. You kick it off.
All right. So let's first take a look at armaments, shielding, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Let's do.
They both have shields. We have no idea how to really compare them to one another.
By toughness and what they can withstand.
Right.
right.
yeah.
Yeah. We don't know.
We don't know.
Like in
yeah.
terms of relativity.
We don't know. We don't know how much damage one could take from
Right.
the Enterprise, and we don't know how much damage vice versa.
Right. I suppose we could look at, say, if one of them collided with like a physical thing, an asteroid.
Like an
or
asteroid.
something,
Yeah. Okay.
what would be the damage taken?
Mhm.
Enterprise would suffer damage. I don't think the Millennium Falcon could take one too well.
Well, it could fly into one.
Well, now look at also
You're right. You're
the
absolutely right.
Millennium
They can't take
Falcon. You know, the Enterprise is more of a size of a capital ship. I mean, they've got a crew of
Well,
what 50, 100 people or more.
No,
that's why
it's
he
actually
first
that
said
big.
Star Destroyer, though. He wanted to
Right.
make it fair.
Yeah, whereas the Falcon is would
It's a
consider
fighter.
a
It's
small.
not, it's
Yeah,
not capital.
I
it's
think
a
by
fighter.
a size of Star Destroyer actually outclasses
The Enterprise. It
the
does.
Enterprise by
I'm sure.
miles.
Now,
I'm sure.
I've seen the Falcon take down Star Destroyers, which is, you were right to use a Star Destroyer, but I've seen the Falcon destroy them.
Mhm.
So, I mean, Red. I'm going through canon, and I've seen them outrun Star Destroyers with no problem, so I think the
I don't
Falcon
think
could
those
beat a
ones
Star
canon
Destroyer.
anymore.
They're
Oh,
not, because
okay.
Disney. But
Yeah.
they keep pulling canon out. Like, it's strange, but you're right, absolutely.
I know that the Enterprise is able to change their shields, change the modulation of their shields, or focus the shields in certain areas
Take some
and
power
stuff like
from
that.
one area and put it all to the front or the back.
Right,
Yeah.
where I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever seen the Falcon able to do that kind of stuff. It's just we've
Okay.
got
If they
shields.
can, they haven't
They
demonstrated.
haven't demonstrated, but a capital ship in Star Wars can.
Yes, you're right. Because
They
full
can.
power in
Full
front
power
or
thrusters
whatever.
to the front.
Yeah.
right,
so-
right.
So let's talk about then armaments.
Okay.
So what are the armaments of the Falcon? We have those two turrets, top and
Uh,
bottom.
Double dual turbo laser cannons, which is just the equivalent
Does
of
it have
a
to be
beef.
turbo?
No, I'm sorry. It doesn't have to be
But that's
turbo.
what they're called.
But that, okay,
the
but
equivalent of heavy machine guns.
heavy machine gun in a B-52 or
Yeah.
something like that. So it's not that strong. Your turn.
Okay.
I don't want to admit it, but it's not that strong.
Armaments of the Enterprise include the phaser banks, which are I think they circle the whole thing because they come from the disc.
Yeah, I've seen that one. I've seen it. I've
Yeah,
seen what
Maybe
you're talking
maybe I'm
about.
thinking maybe I'm mistaking with some of the newer ships like the Voyager and the Enterprise 2.
Okay.
Possibly.
Okay.
But I do know at least in some of the later ones that the phaser
Mm-hmm.
the phaser bank is can come out of pretty much anywhere on the disc.
Wow. Okay.
So they have basically full
360 degrees.
360 degree fire. I
attack.
think at least in one
That's
full
awesome.
sphere or
And
half
you
sphere,
know-
one half sphere.
And to give you the point on this one, if we wanted, if anyone on the Falcon wanted to shoot from a certain spot, not 360 degrees, you have to climb out, go to that part of the ship, get into that turret and shoot, and they're already dead by that point. I think we know who won.
Yeah, when it comes because we didn't even touch on the Enterprise's photon torpedoes and stuff
And that
like
would just
that. you know.
destroy.
And that's not even the ace in the hole. The ace in the
What's
hole
the ace in the hole?
teleporting a photon torpedo straight into the Falcon
Sure.
It's from the inside out.
from the inside out.
So when you
Alright.
look
Ding,
at
ding, ding.
ship
Mike
combat,
Tyson.
now the Star Trek wins.
Star
Now
Trek
let's
wins.
look at hand-to-hand combat. We put like Kylo Ren or Darth Vader against
Worf.
Worf? Oh, I give it to Kylo Ren every day.
Yeah, when
Like-
a Force user versus Worf. I mean, Worf is a badass,
Yeah.
but
Worf is.
but he doesn't have power. He doesn't have the Force, and
He
so
doesn't have a saber that literally cuts through.
Cuts through
metal.
everything.
Right,
He doesn't.
he doesn't
Kylo
say
don't even
when it
need the
comes
force. He just needs to get pissed off and have that thing in his hand.
right. They got the lightsaber, and you've got the ability to force choke from
Oh,
afar and
yeah,
whatever. Like
yeah.
I think hand-to-hand combat,
Hand-to-hand combat.
Star Wars
Correct.
wins.
Correct. Now, here's
Um,
another interesting question. What wins blasters in the Star Wars universe, or what guns / tasers I'm not too familiar with in, what was a shootout? Who wins a shootout in
Yeah,
Star Trek or Star
shootout.
Wars?
Are we
This I
talking
have
about
no
the
clue.
stormtroopers who are going to sit there and miss every shot?
No, no stormtroopers. Let's say give
Han
me
Solo.
Han Solo
Okay.
Versus Riker.
versus some, I don't know. So you tell me the fastest gunslinger in basically the equivalent to that.
I mean, Star Trek isn't exactly known for its gunslingers.
Yeah, because it's not a spaghetti
Right.
western.
I would say probably Riker would be the closest
Yeah.
equivalent.
I got
yeah.
Red.
I'm going to still give that to Star Wars then, because
Okay.
in Star Trek they don't really have a whole lot in the way of military tactics. Some of the newer ones they'll have special commando units.
Okay. Okay.
But as far as the everyday scientist aboard a starship,
They're not armed like that.
right? They stand in the middle of the hallway, completely straight up, and they point and aim like that.
Wow.
Right.
Okay, I get you.
Well, when
Alright.
you consider, the crews of the Enterprise, whatever, I mean, they're on an exploratory mission. They're not a warship.
Right.
They're scientists, and they're not hardcore soldiers. They're not special forces.
No.
They're officers.
Right. The
Absolutely.
most military they have is pretty much their security force
Gotcha.
at any given time.
and which is being guarded and protected by them because they have missions that are much more important than learning how to shoot a gun.
Right. Whereas in Star Wars, everyone we see is either military, the Empire or
Yep.
First Order, or
You're a bounty
Rebels,
hunter.
bounty hunter, or Rebels/Resistance, which although not officially military, they are a militaristic force.
Yes,
Right.
they are. Yep. If you don't know how to fight in Star Wars, you're pretty much on a sand planet collecting junk.
Or
Right.
C-3PO.
Or C-3PO.
Well,
The C-3PO is cool.
I think Data could kick the shit out of C-3PO.
any day.
But maybe
But
not
not
R2-D2.
R2's a Swiss Army knife of craziness.
Right,
isn't it?
R2 is a badass.
Uh-huh.
So, all right. Well, I think that wraps up. We've talked about the differences in the genres and the shows themselves, the amount of canon. We've talked about specific things, the technology. We think we gave Star Trek the advantage over Star Wars
did.
when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, or blasters. Star Wars beats Star Trek. We've had a lot of comparisons and what's the word?
Contrast.
Kind of contrast and such, comparisons and contrast. I don't think there's a clear winner in this, which I didn't think there was going to be to begin with. There's a lot of people watching this who are Star Trek fans, Star Wars fans.
Yeah.
Brent, thank you so much for giving us such an insight that in Nick and my conversations about this, we never talked about identifying the genre of science fiction versus spaghetti western or high fantasy, whatever. We never thought about that. We wouldn't have had the information about the Enterprise and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
You really brought a lot of value, and we've got to come up with other topics to have you on the show
That
about.
would be brilliant. I want to say thanks, Brent, a lot.
Thank
The
you.
number one thing, no problem. The number one thing I took from Brent, guys, is instead of pushing against Star Trek and against the idea, I'm now going to go home and check this out. So thanks for raising my eyebrows and dropping some knowledge on me.
Nerd Street is a long street with
Yeah.
multiple lanes, and there's room
Lot
for
of
Star
different neighbors.
Trek and Star Wars and all that
There's
kind
room
of
for
stuff.
everything.
Folks, leave your comments below. Tell us what you like better, Star Trek, Star Wars. Tell us why. Tell us what you thought about our guest here. Be like, bring
Should
Brent
I
back.
trade
He
in
needs
this
to be-"
Brent for this Brent?
Right,
Let
that's
us know.
right. You might have to shave your head.
You have to
though.
shave your head though, bro. Yeah.
Hit that like button, hit that subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get the notifications. Thanks for your support. Thanks for watching. And Brent's not gonna know the
We're gonna do it on the count of three. We're gonna get
All right.
we're gonna get our guest to do it. Okay,
Follow
so we
along
count to
with us,
three.
okay.
You gotta throw an X-Force up. All right.
All right.
All right.
All right. Thanks for coming. And 1, 2, 3.
X-Force.